Farmers are one of the most important jobs in any society, but they're especially important in ancient Egypt. Hi, welcome to my channel. Today we're going to learn about farmers in ancient Egypt. If you're new here, subscribe and click the bell so you never miss an exciting episode. So let's start with the gift of the Nile. The Nile River was central to Egyptian farming. Each year the river would flood, leaving behind fertile black soil called kemet. The soil was so good that some places could grow 2 or even 3 crops a year. Without the Nile, Egypt's desert climate would have made large-scale farming impossible. So life along the river was concentrated there. What did they grow? Egypt was one of the first places where people domesticated plants. The earliest forms of wheat and barley, for example, can be found there. But because this is such a dry area, we don't find much evidence of what they grew. The Egyptians kept careful records of their crops, though, in the form of tomb paintings and small clay models. These records help us understand what role farming played in the Egyptian economy. Egyptians grew 2 staple foods, wheat and barley. They were used to make bread and beer, which was the main diet. Farmers grew other vegetables and fruits too, like onions, garlic, beans, lettuce, figs, dates, and grapes. Some of these staples, like emmer wheat, are still eaten today. Farmers also grew industrial crops like flax, which was used for linen, and papyrus, which was used for writing material. This was very important for the Egyptian economy since papyrus was exported all over the Mediterranean. Flax probably had multiple uses too, but we can only guess at them since the plant's seeds were processed into oil, linen, and paint. The oil may have been used in religious ceremonies, while the linen might have been used as bandages for mummies, and the paint may have been used to decorate tombs and sarcophagi. But how did they farm? Farming techniques in ancient Egypt developed over thousands of years. In the early dynastic period, farmers used digging sticks and a type of hoe. But by the Old Kingdom, they started using more sophisticated tools. Most tools were made of copper, bronze, or iron. For plowing, farmers used simple wooden plows pulled by oxen. After the plow, farmers used sickles, either made of flint or bronze, to cut the wheat and barley. Once the crops were cut, the grain had to be separated from the stalks. To do this, farmers used a type of flail. It consisted of 2 sticks, one longer than the other, which were bound together at one end. The grain was placed between them, and the flail was swung back and forth until the grain came loose. Then farmers used a special kind of winnowing fork to throw the grain into the air. The wind would blow the chaff away, leaving the grain behind. Finally, the grain was threshed. It was put into a basket and trampled underfoot until the grain was separated from the chaff. Once the grain was threshed, it was stored in granaries until it was needed. Granaries were usually built near the farms where the grain was stored. They were made of mud brick and had flat roofs so that farmers could store grain for long periods of time. When the grain was needed, it was taken out of the granaries and distributed to the people who needed it. How did they irrigate? To irrigate their fields, farmers used a system of irrigation canals and basins. The canals were dug along the Nile, and the basins were built in the fields. The canals carried water from the Nile to the fields, and the basins held the water in the fields. Farmers carefully managed the water in the basins so that their crops got just the right amount of water. Too much water would cause the crops to rot. Not enough water would cause the crops to wither and die. Managing the water was one of the most important parts of farming in ancient Egypt. Farming was very important to the Egyptian economy. The crops grown in Egypt were used to feed the people, to make beer, and to export to other countries. Farming was also important because it provided jobs for many people. In fact, about 3 to 4 of the population were farmers. What was the farmer's role in society? Life for farmers in ancient Egypt wasn't easy. They worked long hours for low pay. Most of the food they grew had to be given to the pharaoh or the rich landowners. But farming was an important part of Egyptian society, and farmers were respected for their work. Farmers were usually buried with the tools of their trade, showing how important their job was to the Egyptians. So, what do you think? What was the most interesting thing that you learned about Egyptian farmers? Let me know in the comments section below. And remember, if you haven't subscribed yet, do so now and click the bell so you never miss an exciting episode. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye.